So I made two 1-hour videos about the socket code, which probably no one is very interested in watching me talking for 2 hours. So in here there is a very quick, because it's very simple to be honest, so I'll go through 2018 exam question about the code, and it should be clear enough how to approach it. So here we go. We have a list of variables and arguments that we have to use for this code. We have blank spaces here that we have to fill. So in here there's a snippet from our code. So basically, just you can see there is a socket here, and the last argument for socket is IP proto TCP. That's the protocol variable that we use for the socket. And then next line here we have memset. The first argument for memset is server address with the ampersand here. And then we have the server address Sem5 family is AF INET. Then we get to this guy here. Return value doesn't matter, it's just something that is used for error checking. But then we get something something, and we put in INET, server IP, and where it goes. So it kind of reminds me of the IP address that we store in the struct in here. So that's this fancy function here that we use for storing the address. Next one here is server address something something pitons server port. So that's our port, so that's going to be sin underscore port, and you can see it here. That's the port. And then we get connect something something, and rest of the arguments are connect. The first argument for connect is socket that we created here. So whatever is, if on the exam that sock is called something else, we have to put it in here. But basically, to get ready for this question, this kind of question, it's a very easy question to be honest. You just have to memorize a couple of things, and they're not so hard. So let's go through the client, the typical structure of client. So first of all, we have the socket primitives, and 4 socket primitives that we use for client is socket, connect, send, and receive. And going from the top, socket primitive accepts three arguments, which is family, address family, for example AF INET, socket type, for example socket stream, and then we get the protocol, and in our case it's protocol TCP. Then we get the connect, and it accepts the socket first, and then we have to put in this socket address structure, and we have to write it like this. So the type goes like this, and as you can see, the difference here is that we create socket address in struct, but then we store it as socket address without in, but then we put the asterisk here and ampersand and server address, so the name of the variable itself. Okay, and then we get the size of it, because C needs to know what is the size of this variable we're playing with. And then we have send, send where argument socket, just like connect, and just like receive, by the way. Oh, sorry, there's a mistake here. It's not receive, it's a receive. Okay. So third primitive for client is send, and it accepts socket, send buffer. So where do we, what is the message that we're sending, and what is the length of that message. And then we have some flags here, but in our case we never use these flags, so just put in 0 there. And so for CV is very similar. The only difference is, so we use socket, but we specify the variable that we will store our message in. So instead of saying, okay, this is my message, this is where I stored my message and I want to send it, we say, okay, this is where we store it, and that's the size of the of this variable. That's the maximum, because we declare it here. We say receive receive buffer is of size buffer size, so we can't get anything bigger than that, and then the flag is 0. But we can use something else, but in our case we never used anything else than 0. Okay, in HTTP server we have a bit more going on, but slightly more. So as you can see, it's kind of encapsulated in the same way. First we initialize, we create a socket, and then we can do, at the very end, we do receive and send. The same here, socket and receive and send. In the middle we have connect. In case of HTTP server, we have bind, listen, and accept in the middle instead of connect. Server does a bit more. But anyway, so from the top we have socket. Socket does the same thing as in client, accepts the same arguments. Then we bind. We use the socket that we created here, and then we say, okay, so we want to bind our socket with the server address of size whatever of that server address, and then we listen. We start listening to that server socket, so we put in the first argument, the server socket, and then we say how many pending connections can we accept. So we set it here, it's 5, so we just use that in here. And then we say accept whenever the connection is being made. We accept that connection using the, okay, so what's the server socket that we're listening to, where the connection came from, and here we said, okay, we listen only to one server socket. Okay, so server socket, and then we say where do we want to store the information about the connection address. So we create in here, we declare new socket for client address, and we say, okay, store it in here, and that's going to be the size of that client address, and we created that one here, just say size of in type of socket length t. And then we have receive and send, which works exactly the same as for the client, exactly the same arguments. So if you remember this, you're gonna get a lot of points. Okay, that I was talking for a couple of minutes, and this is a lot of points from just that. And then there's a couple of more things that you want to know. Sorry, that should be pointing here. So on the client side, there is something like okay, so on client side we have to send when we run the program, client program, the arguments we have to put in is the IP address of the server that we're connecting to. There is the port that of the address, of the server that the server is listening to. So we have to say what the port is, and then there is some message that we are sending. In this case, for it, that's the HTTP client. We send HTTP request. So we store so it's important to remember that we store the port in port T type, and we do the A to I to turn the string into the int type. Okay, then we have this bit here, which is also important. We have to initialize, declare server address, and we zero out the memory in RAM. So here you have the explanation, and then I think it's good because there is a question here. If you look at this question, it's from 2018. We are supposed to know what goes in here, so just memorize what memset function does and what kind of arguments it takes, and then we start populating this structure Sem family with the AF INET. So on the client side, when we want to populate the address of the structure, we have to use the INET Python function. Okay, so that's important, and remember what goes in this function. Then we get this guy. So basically, to store the port in this structure, we go server address dot syn port, and we use this function htons, and we put in the integer. Well, no, it's not integer exactly, it's in port T, but it's basically like an integer, and we have to use this function. And then, okay, there's a couple of things here. I spoke about the primitives. So there's this guy string str. That's just for checking if this string has this pattern in it, and if it does, if it's more than 0, then we can do something. So this basically, this line says, okay, I found the end of the message, stop receiving. And daytime server, it's not daytime server, it is sorry, that's the HTTP server, and that's, oh sorry, no, that's daytime. So that's, oh yeah, that's the HTTP server. Okay, so that's the HTTP server. So in terms of like except for the primitives, we get stuff like this. So the only difference between the client and the server is when we create this server address structure, we don't have to do the fancy inet python here. Inet python, that's used for storing the address because it comes in form of string, and here we just use this function hdonl in address any, and but the rest is the same. We just we declare it, we put the zeros in there, and then we populate it with in family with af inet. This is different. We use this function, and then we use htons. It's the same function for the port. And then we have to declare structure for client address as well. So in the client we don't have to do it because we are the client, and we just have to create a structure for the server. And here we have to declare first the client address structure, and then we have to store the length, the size of it, so we can use it in the accept function primitive. So just remember this receive buffer of num bytes. We put in the \0 because that signifies the end of the string. So here's the explanation how it works. And also maybe you want to remember this scanf receive buffer. So what we are going through, what kind of pattern we are looking for, and where do we save that pattern. So just memorize how it works. Okay, and the second question here. So sorry. So this is kind of the most the most points we get from memorizing all those things. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4 pages. You have to remember a couple of names, couple of structures, couple of arguments and primitives. It's not that many of them. So we have client that has 4 primitives that it uses, and we have server that uses 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 primitives, but that's it. And a couple of different functions and structures you might remember. But then second question in here is, okay, so this is a very easy one. Is it client or server? As you can see here, the client has only these primitives, and it uses the connect. So just look for connect. If you can't see connect, look for bind, listen, or accept. If you see any of these, this is the server program. If you see connect, that means it's a client. And also, if it's a server, you'll find the forever loop here, because server is listening forever. Okay, so that's a very easy question. And the third one here is 4 marks. What goes after, basically what goes after this snippet, what goes in here. So as you can, first, how do you think about it? Okay, it's a client, so what goes after connect? The last bit here is the connect. So what goes after connect? It goes send and receive, but because it's a daytime, we only receive, we don't send anything in daytime. So the answer to this question is receive. But if that was the question about echo or HTTP, we would say send, because we send the message and then we receive the return message. In terms of in case of daytime, we don't do that, because the server of daytime is just like continuously sending some message. So we just say, okay, connect and get whatever message we receive. Okay, so that's it, and that should give you enough information to get a couple of points from this question.